Hey guys, welcome to Chef Grace's Place. Today I have Michele Thorne of Food Slain, which is one of my favorite podcasts. It's all about all the issues surrounding food, as well as spotlighting some important people in food. So, how did you get started with food?
Well, I started a long time ago. One of my biggest influences getting into food as a child. So the way that food impacted my family and the health of my family was really the beginning catalyst because I was kind of a picky eater. I would always pick the fat off of lamb. I wouldn't eat milk. I wouldn't eat cheese. I just was really picky. And my mother would she would almost force me to eat stuff, and I hated that. And then when I became a young adult, right after college, I had befriended a young lady who she was 21, and she one night had hemorrhaged overnight and was in the hospital. And I thought, that's wrong. That should not be happening to somebody who's 21. Now,
She
mind
had
you,
a
I
brain hemorrhage, or
no, it was like a uterine hemorrhage.
oh,
I, and she didn't have kids or anything. And, now knowing what I know, of course, there could be a lot of reasons behind that have nothing to do with food. But I thought back then, I was like, it must be the food. And so I went down a very long and circuitous road to find answers. I started asking questions. Why is food like this? Or what about this? And I actually joined a CSA back then. And I'm a New Yorker. So I grew up in New York. And at the time, I was living in Harlem. And there was a guy who had a CSA in the federal building in Harlem, like on the seventh floor. And he was like teaching these classes, blew my head wide open. That was the day that I really I couldn't stop asking questions. I was like, why this? Why that? Why this? And when somebody isn't telling the truth, like you know a lie when you hear it. And so I began to poke holes in these lies that we were being told about food. And that really jump started this pathway for me. I couldn't leave it alone because when somebody lies to you, what do? Nobody likes that. You
well,
get
also with your food, it's like, how can you trust anything ever again?
right,
you know?
right. So that was kind of the beginning for me. And from there, I got into teaching food, teaching vegetarian cooking. I became a chef. I became a private chef and a caterer. I facilitated juice fast and detox. I wrote a book about it. I really just went, I don't know if I can say this, but balls to the wall, really like I explored every diet that you could. I read every book. I just couldn't leave it alone. It was one of those things that would just bother me constantly because I don't like being lied to. I don't know anybody who likes being lied to, especially like you said, when it comes to things that we're consuming and we're putting into our body, we're consciously choosing to eat something, then, whatever's on the package, we have this public trust with food manufacturers. Come to find out, they're full of it. They're full of it.
Full of a lot of things. A lot of things that shouldn't be in there. That's what they're full of.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of those things I talk about on my podcast because they're dangerous. It's not even so much that, oh, they don't taste good or, maybe they won't hurt you this much or that much. Like they're carcinogenic. They'll kill you. That's why my podcast is called Food Slain, like food chain, but killing you. The food supply chain is killing us slowly, but surely.
Yeah, it is. It's also, you know, I mean, I was listening to someone like a lot of your podcasts are like, this is what I was trying to say, but I didn't know how to say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which leads me to my next question. Do you have a background in like public speaking or something, like professionally? Because you're a great speaker.
Well, thank you. I don't have public speaking background, but it's just something, everybody's got something that they're good at. And I think that that's just something that, for a long time, I was afraid to speak out. I was afraid to share my voice. So this podcast was also a catalyst for that. Interestingly enough, because I've been an educator for a really long time, I started teaching cooking classes in 2002. And so that's almost 20 years. And getting up in front of people and teaching them something is probably one of the most challenging things that you can do, because teaching is hard, but mostly teaching is entertainment, because you're trying to teach someone something useful, but also keep their attention. I'm sure you've had plenty of teachers who just sound like wah, 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 right? Like and nobody retains anything. And I don't want that. Like, I want people to have fun and learn something and take a recipe home and try it and, circle back with me and tell me how it went, how they modified it. And that's been a big part of my teaching style. And from teaching food, I've taught lots of other things. The first thing I ever taught, you want to know what it is? I taught swimming. I was a lifeguard for a really, really long time. And
Awesome.
it was part of my job to teach kids how to swim. And I was so scared to teach people how to swim because people drown. Like, that's a real thing. People drown and they die. And if you don't teach people the right thing to do, that could be horrendous. So when I was 17, I was a lifeguard. I got my teaching certification then. And that really gave me the foundation for teaching and being okay with, being an authority, air quotes, on something. And then I started teaching first aid. And then out of college, I started teaching food and food preparation. Every now and again, I teach game theory to youth, and, I do online classes. So I like teaching. And that's probably where my level of comfort speaking, with a purpose or succinctly and writing, some of these things comes from. So that's where that came from.
That's cool. Before I started teaching, I remember having to do it was called I don't know, it was like a senior thesis, like you had to go do a presentation. And I've always been pretty monotone and got made fun of it for my whole life. But because I have a twin and he's like a proper musician, like proper singer and everything. And so like we're very yin and yang. But so I was just like he could barely hear me, you know what I mean? And the teacher was like, speak up, but I was just so nervous. And then I started teaching. And at first it was like really nerve-wracking, but then I realized, other things that happened before that, when I realized, like everybody's kind of just pretend like faking it till they're making it when they're doing this. So that kind of like, okay, like relaxed me a little bit. And then I was able to talk in front of people.
Yeah. And now you're talking on camera. Look at that.
It's actually a little bit easier because there's nobody here.
That's true.
You're here.
Right.
But it's also harder because I can't, I can see your reaction, but I can't, like, if I'm doing like a cooking video, I'm like, but and also when I became a flight attendant, like, I really had to start like talking to people. So like, it helped a lot.
Cool thing to do with your life.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I thought, if I could do it again, I would consider being a flight attendant, see the world, visit really interesting places.
I think it's probably better to like be friends with a flight attendant or marry one. So this way you can just use their flight benefits.
Yeah.
But because the only, you get the jet lag and stuff. That's not fun. But
Yeah.
back to you. So you live on a farm now, as I saw. How did
I'm a,
you make the transition from going to the city out to the farm?
I've always been a nature lover. My grandmother was a huge influence in my life in that respect. She always was camping when I was young. My sister and all of my cousins and I, we all were camping throughout our teenage years up until we went to college. And so, you know, although I grew up in New York City and I love New York City for all the great things, it's great to be in New York City when you're young and just out there, hanging out and whatever. But after a while, I just wanted a quieter life. I just, and I think I realized that um, this might sound really awful, but a lot of people suck, you know, it just, it just get on my nerves. Um, but there are a lot of great people out there too, not to say that there aren't great people and that I haven't met some incredible people in cities or in rural parts of where I've lived. And I've been lucky. I've lived in a lot of really unique places and situations. And, I've just gotten farther and farther and farther away from cities. Even though right here I've got all this road noise, you think I'm like right in the city. Um, but yeah, I chose to become a farmer. It was just the next thing. It was the next logical progression for me because food was so important that I needed to understand how to grow my own. And so I did. And I started that in 2012. It's the first time I ever had a garden. At the time, I was living on a boat in one of the most beautiful places in California. And I never looked back. I thought I will forever have a garden at least. And then in the last couple of years, I don't know what happened, Grace. I think, I think food slaying happened and I started really getting serious about growing so much of my food that I didn't have to rely on the food supply chain for more than 50% of my food. And I haven't done the numbers, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't really done the numbers, of how much of my food I'm able to grow in a year. But it's a lot. I preserve a lot of my food. I dehydrate, I freeze, I make a bunch of stuff. I mean, I'm a livestock farmer. So, I raise small livestock. I raise birds, I raise turkey, quail, chickens, ducks, all for food. And, I feel more comfortable even though it is a difficult road. And my mother asked me this just recently, and I was talking to her about, 'cause we have to send animals to freezer camp. That's what we call it, you know. And, she's like, well, I mean, how do you feel about that? Like, isn't that hard? Because she could never do that. And most people could never do that. We're so far removed from our food supply chain. Back in the day, our ancestors raised backyard chickens and they would slaughter their chickens, right, for food. That's just what they did. Now we go to the grocery store, we buy our chicken in a styrofoam package covered in plastic, right? And that's how we consume our meat, which, in my opinion, is much more inhumane than what I'm choosing, which is to raise my own chickens, send my chickens to freezer camp, and know that the chickens that I've raised aren't injected with salt solution, sodium nitrates. They're not fed a diet of corn and soy. They live a great life. They are slaughtered humanely. Like, I could go on and on, like nothing goes to waste, and I talk about a lot of that in my episode in season 1 called My Beef with Chicken. I even talked about it in a recent video on my YouTube channel because Tyson, one of the largest chicken producers in the country, just recalled 9 million pounds of chicken for listeria poisoning. Listeria, like crazy. One person died, two people got sick. Like it's just, and it doesn't end. It just doesn't end because of the way that commercially produced chickens are raised from their breeding. The type of breed of chicken is really unhealthy because they get so fat so fast that their bones can't handle the weight gain. They hardly ever move. They never see a blade of grass. They don't get to eat bugs. In fact, they eat pork for dinner. A lot of those chickens, factory farm chickens, they eat corn and soy and all the GMOs, and they're raised for 6 weeks. They're slaughtered. They go to a chicken processing plant. They get packaged up and shipped however many hundreds of miles to your local grocery store or distributor even. And then it goes to your local grocery store and then you buy it, and people don't think about, even though a lot of these companies have, and I say air quotes, sustainability reports, there's nothing sustainable about what they're doing. Really nothing, because they're contaminating the water tables and the soil. They're using inputs like GMO corn and soy. They're using other meat byproducts that chickens are eating. They're using antibiotics. These chickens, even though the USDA can legally allow them to say that they're natural, they never see a blade of grass. They never see the sunshine. They walk around in their feces all day. Like it, if you've, I could go.
That's the thing, like people, people are, especially with the, the fun, all these new, like you call them voodoo science or, pseudosciences, right? Everyone's like, oh, it's natural. And I'm like, yeah, but arsenic is natural. Like, it's not, the feces that they're walking around in, that's natural. Like, you gotta, even the term organic, right? Made from carbon, right? So, like, we gotta legally term, are we using a legal term? Or are we using this? So, that's just, an example of how they're going to use those words to just confuse you and, bend the truth and things like that. So in comparison though, with your chickens, how long do they live? And, I think
the breed. It depends on the breed, right? There are broiler chickens, which are similar to the broiler chickens that you'll find in the grocery store. They're called a Cornish cross. And I've raised several different kinds of chickens. I've raised Cornish cross on pasture, right? And they do get heavy and they do get like, these bigger breasts and bigger thighs. Their bones are shorter because they have less time to develop and mature before they start putting on all that weight. But I don't feed them corn or soy. So they gain weight more slowly. So it could be 8 weeks, it could be 10 weeks, it could be 12 weeks. I've raised Freedom Rangers, which is a heritage breed, which their bones are longer. Like it's remarkable to kind of see how, the anatomy of chicken, when you're going through this process, their meat is different. The flavor of their meat is different. If you've never tasted like a freshly harvested chicken or a chicken that was really, truly raised on pasture, right? I don't think you've really had chicken, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I switched from, like, one of the things like I refused to give up when during the pandemic, even though I lost my job, was I kept my Butcher Box subscription.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I got that in the mail, having the chicken from that. And before that, I was always trying to get like better quality meat, but I had to live with my mom for a little bit, and they just bought.
We all do at some point in our adulthood.
Yep. And so her boyfriend was loved this one grocery store where you could get like discount meat and stuff like that. And he brought home these chicken breasts that were like 3 pounds each. And
That's
I
like
was like, I was like, I don't want to eat that. Like, there's no way that's healthy. Like, and I remember like him cooking it, and you could see this, there were like spaces between the meat, like the muscle fibers, because of how much like water was in it. It was insane.
they have to do that. They have to pump them with salt solutions. Ask me why.
Why?
Because what chicken or meat does after you, let's say you butcher it off the animal, is it releases like plasma and water, right? Like just like our bodies are mostly water, like there's water in the muscle tissue. And so it begins to leak out, it leaches out naturally. And so they pump the salt solutions in to keep the meat from doing that too quickly. They do it to minimize bacteria. They do it to keep the meat fresher longer because it has to have a shelf life, right? It's being shipped from, let's say Greeley, Colorado to New Jersey. That takes a couple of days, on ice, not frozen, right? So, they have to do it if they want people to buy it, because like I said, we buy with our eyes. So if we go into the grocery store and we visually see a package of chicken breasts that has pools of water, that pink,
Yeah.
slimy stuff in it, who's going to buy it? Nobody.
And yeah, that's the one thing I also try to talk about too, is like those factory farmed animals, they have a terrible life. But like, someone who's raising livestock like you, they have one bad day. And we all have one bad day. So it's just like I would much rather eat the thing that had one bad day than a terrible life.
And most small farmers that I know, every farmer that I've ever interviewed on my podcast cares so deeply about their animals. They care so deeply about them. They care about their happiness. They care about their health and their well-being. They care about the quality of food and feed that they're able to provide for them. They care about how much pasture they get to eat. They care about the quality of the pasture that they eat. I mean, it's just endless, the endless concern for animals. Why? Because that animal at the end of the day is a food source, not just for themselves and their families, but for other people. And so in the real market, because, I talk about economics on my podcast too. In the real free market, there's competition. And when there's true competition, that means people have choice, right? Competition determines pricing in a lot of ways, unless there's collusion, and corporate control. But when there's true competition, if I'm raising chickens, say for public consumption, and I'm selling to my customers, I know that my customer has a choice to go buy from somebody else. And so I want to make sure that I have a value proposition that meets a standard that I'm proud of, that if they ask me any questions, that I can provide those answers to them, because I know they can choose somebody else. And raising livestock is a lot of work. There's a lot of farmers that don't make money doing it. It's not a glamorous thing to do, really, but to me, it's the trade-off is, I don't make a lot of money farming. I just don't, but the trade-off is that I get extreme value in the outcome. When I go into my freezer and I take one of those turkey sausages that I made from the turkeys that I raised and deboned and made my sausage, put it in the freezer with such care, with the herbs that I grew and the garlic that I grew and like all of these things, like to me, it's a very special breakfast. At that point, I get to say, oh, yeah, I'm having turkey sausage today with no nitrates in it. Thank you very much.
Do you sell any of that to the public?
Hell no. I keep that turkey sausage just for me. No,
Just wondering.
make your own turkey sausage. No, at some point, maybe, I mean, I'm such a small operation, and it takes so many years to kind of figure out systems and process and to make it cost effective and to be profitable. I mean, most farmers spend the first 4 or 5 years just trying to get their rotational grazing down and get their water irrigation in, grow their soil. It's a long process. But this is why there's commercial farming. This is why there are monocrops in the world. Because if there wasn't such a demand for grilled chicken breasts, let's just take one product. When this whole diet craze started, everybody was like, oh, gotta eat grilled chicken breast.
Chicken breast.
Right? If there wasn't such a demand for grilled chicken breasts, not only the demand for it, but the price is so low. These commercial operations can sell their chicken at 99 cents a pound. Why? Because they're doing 20,000 chickens every 6 weeks, because they have economies of scale. They have the benefit of that. And so they can push out all this cheap meat into the market. Who cares if it's unhealthy? It's cheap, right? People need to eat. And that is a real thing. Not everybody can afford to pay. I knew one farmer who, the first round of chickens that they did, they had to charge $7.50 a pound for a 3 or 4 pound chicken. Can you imagine paying $25 for one chicken?
No.
A lot of people can't, right? It's just not something that they're willing to do. But that's what it costs, if they're gonna make any money on it. It's a rough road because small farmers they can't leverage economies of scale. So you're buying feed at retail, you're buying implements at retail, you're buying livestock at retail. You just don't have the benefit of economies of scale. So it's difficult, and I understand that. And not everybody can do it. Not everybody's going to make money doing it. In fact, there's a podcast in my head about whether small farming is even a good idea from a profitability standpoint. Environmentally, it's great, right? Farmers are improving soil for the most part, small farmers, because they've got animals on pasture, and that's improving the soil, that's sequestering carbon. Like environmentally, if they're doing the right thing with their waste, great. But is it economically sustainable? And for a lot of people, they have to supplement their income, whether it's through an off-farm job, or their spouse works, or they have to sell other products off of their farm in order to make enough, money to sustain the operation. Like it's tough. It's tough. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I wonder about that, but I also, when you look at the food system, it's just like you see everybody getting hacked. Like it can't go on the way it's going on. And also you have to think that, like corn, wheat, and soy, they're all subsidized by the government. So it's kind of like there's got to be a way to legislate some incentive into having some small farms like that. Like it has to
hear your ideas, because I've thought about this and have argued this point for many, many years. And I haven't come up with an answer. So I can't wait to hear what you have to say about that.
I mean, I think I think there's just, just like at the diets, like there's not really one answer for especially every place. America's huge, right? But I don't think we're ever really going to get rid of the industrial farming system, but I think there's got to be a way for, at least local municipalities and things like that to have some sort of community agriculture, because it's just,
I mean, you would think so.
you would think so.
I'm not hopeful. I'm not I mean, okay, that's not true. I am hopeful.
We have all these parks and recs departments. Instead of grass, let's plant some food.
You know, in the 1940s, after World War or during the war, there was a thing called Victory Gardens where people were basically commissioned or subsidized by the government to grow food in their front yard for the soldiers. And everybody got to gardening in their front yard. And they were victory gardens. And it was great because most of that food did go to feed the military that was going off to war. And it was awesome. But why doesn't that work? Why doesn't that work now? You have any idea?
Then we wouldn't need to buy food at the big box store. Well, we wouldn't need to buy as much of it, and then they wouldn't get our money.
Yeah, that's true. But there's also these like regulations, and I talked about it with one of my guests, James McWalter, and he's doing this like, trying to make the food system sustainable, which is a great idea. I wish we could do it. But I think one of the challenges is, or there are many challenges, but I think one of the most difficult challenges to overcome is the regulatory government regulations regarding food is, how do I say this nicely? It's complicated. It's complicated. In a lot of ways, it's corrupt because they're colluding with a lot of these corporate interests to control our food. So they're giving them the right to contaminate rivers and streams and communities by dumping their waste. I mean, there's just story after story after story. I could go on and on about that. But, when you start talking about people growing their own food, what does it really take when you really, really think about it? It takes time, which, okay, in economics, there's a thing, time versus money. There's trade-offs. So if you have to spend a lot of time growing your food, then you can't spend your time trading it for money at a job. If you can't have money coming in, then you have a difficult time feeding your family, even if you're trying to grow food, because growing food takes an entire season, anywhere from 20 to 100 days to grow any amount of food, right, for your family. It's complicated. There's no easy fix. Sure, people can backyard garden, they can keep backyard chickens, get their eggs, but the majority of people rely on the grocery store, which we all saw in 2020 is vulnerable to supply chain disruptions. It left people food insecure. It left hundreds of thousands of people food insecure. It just, it's complicated because of the way that things have been put in place, that we rely on the grocery store for food. The best thing that came out of COVID with the food supply chain is that small farmers came to the rescue. A lot of them had spaces open in their CSAs. And for anybody listening or watching, a CSA is a community supported agriculture group, which a lot of farmers, that's a part of their profitable business models. They run CSAs, they grow food for people for an entire season. People buy in at the beginning of the season, so they're getting cash up front, and it's a great model. I did an episode on Booker T. Watley, who's kind of like the grandfather of the CSA model and making money on a small scale, farm operation. And so it's doable, but everybody can't do it. But what everybody can do is they can support a small farmer that is within 20 miles of where they live.
That's true. And I also think too, just like, in all different types of research, the initial stages are very expensive, right? But the more we can get people supporting these small farms, the more they can kind of research and experiment and maybe figure out ways to do it better, and figure out the problems that I don't have the answers to,
Because it's complicated. It really is. And I empathize with people because people do want answers. Now more than ever, people want to be close to their food. They want to know what's happening with their food. You yourself, you're a chef. You're showing people how to take ingredients and transform them into something delicious, right? And something, healthy or not. You're teaching them ways to do it. So the first thing people do is they go to the grocery store to look for those ingredients. They want to find those ingredients so that they can make whatever you're showing them, to make. Where else are they going to go? I don't know any local farmers that grow flour or wheat to make flour.
That was one of the things that when I first started learning more about growing my own food was in college, and it was a chapter of the slow food movement. It was in my college, and I was the only pastry student there. And I said, well, where are we getting the wheat from? And they all laughed, and as if it was impossible to get organically grown wheat in America at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard.
It's very hard.
I did an episode on wheat.
Yeah, it's very hard.
It is hard. And it's very land intensive, growing grains. It's for a 5-pound bag of flour, I mean, I don't know how many acres it takes to grow wheat, and then the process of drying the wheat and hulling the wheat. I'm getting attacked out here by the bugs, but it's very intense, an intense process. And although I did interview Bob Klein, who is the founder of a company that provides really from farm to table style wheat, like traceable wheat grain. Fascinating. You should definitely listen to that episode. I'm blanking on the name of the company, but he's in California, and I think it was season 4 episode. I don't remember, but you can check it out. Bob Klein. Just fascinating stuff. So there are companies and people that are trying to solve some of these problems. The interesting thing is talking to people like Bob Klein, I talked to another scientist about wheat and how wheat gets separated. And, we're not getting the whole truth with wheat because people say whole grains. What does that even mean? Are we really getting whole grain? The answer is no, we're not. It's another ruse. But, it's just fascinating that there are a lot of people out there trying to do the work, trying to dig to the bottom, right? Pull back the curtain and really see what's going on. And with every episode, just about, it's the same story. It's the same players. It's the same sentiment. Like there's this facade that the public sees in our food products, but there's something underneath that we're not being told. But there's some marketing campaign that's, tied into our pain points, right? Whether it's we want low sugar, or we want less fat, or we want fewer carbs, or we want, whatever our pain points are. These marketing companies, they're geniuses. They know exactly what to say to us. They know what colors to use. They know where to position things. They got the jingles, to get us thinking about it in the middle of our, slumber.
Out of all the issues that you've discussed so far, which one was the most surprising to you?
Epicite corn. There's no doubt about it. They're all really interesting.
What does epicite mean?
Oh, Lord.
Uh-oh.
You've got to listen to that. So the episode is called No Children of This Corn.
Okay.
Which kind of gives you a hint.
I laughed at the title.
what it is. But epicite corn, it was a genetically modified variety of corn that, oh man, I mean, it's so diabolical. It produces antibodies when you consume it. Anybody who consumes this variety of corn produces these antibodies, or they're called plantibodies, right? There are these things that the food itself does this chemical reaction in your body and produces antibodies and these things that kill sperm in men and women. So, we can speculate that it is a population control because corn is in everything. Birth rates are down, like historically low.
Well, birth rates are at the point where we're not replacing the current population.
And dare I speculate that things like epicite corn have something to do with that, because they basically render anyone who eats it infertile.
How?
Let that sit with you for a minute.
How much of this do you have to eat, though?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that. But if you think about the pervasiveness of corn and corn byproducts in the United States and around the world, it's not like we're sitting around eating, corn on the cob every day. If you're eating crackers, you're eating, breaded.
So, we eat a lot of corn, but people don't realize, that corn is grown in a giant monoculture field probably somewhere. And that wind goes across that field and brings those genetics to the corn that's next to it that, then they fertilize that corn, and then you're not getting that variety of corn. You're getting some crazy hybrid that might still have these damn dangerous properties. And then before you know it, all the corn has this genetic trait that's not great for humans. So that's put my tinfoil hat back on for that one.
You're gonna need it. Now that was by far the episode that just disgusts me. It just really disgusts me that there's that level of deception that people don't even know, feeding it to their children. I mean, there's so many. The baby food episode was mind-blowing, that we're feeding arsenic and mercury laced products to our babies.
Yep.
There's so many. My season finale coming up is going to be on microplastics, and anybody who's
going to bring that up.
Yeah, anybody who eats seafood kind of knows about microplastics. But this episode coming up, I mean, you wouldn't even believe where these microplastics are being found in our food supply. It's
not just the microplastics, but then I think they're called phthalates, maybe, that are found in plastics. And you don't even have to, it doesn't even have to be in fish or anything. Even just, they were talking about the tubes of coming from if you have a dairy farm, right? And you're using the tubes to milk the cows, just the milk passing through those tubes is picking up these phthalates and these chemicals that are passing onto the milk, and then you drink it, and it's fucking with the endocrine system so bad that fetuses aren't developing correctly. So
because those tubes are heated because they're ultra pasteurizing. They have to ultra pasteurize that milk to make it safe for public consumption, which is why, during the pandemic, they had to dump all that stuff. All that milk was going to go bad. They couldn't pasteurize it. The food supply chain is set up to fail. And it's really depressing because we all need to eat every day, several times a day, to meet our caloric demand for our bodies to function properly. And if we're not just eating food, right? What we think is healthy food, but we're eating food that's laced with chemicals, that's laced with endocrine disruptors, that's laced with chemical fertilizers, that's laced with this, with that, with artificial flavors, artificial colors. It's the bioaccumulation that begins to break the body down. It's not just that, oh, well, it doesn't really matter if I have a corn dog or I have a corn muffin that's made from GMO. Like, not a big deal. Like, one corn muffin's not going to kill me. No, one corn muffin isn't going to kill you. That's true. But it's the bioaccumulation of corn, genetically modified corn, or the bioaccumulation of arsenic from apple juice and rice products. It's the bioaccumulation of nitrates from foods and meats that we're eating. Like it's that's the problem, is that it's bioaccumulating. The mercury is bioaccumulating, the chemicals, all of those things. And at some point, I did an episode on dog food, because dogs' bodies are even way more sensitive. Dogs and cats, really pets, their bodies are much more sensitive to a lot of these, additives than our bodies are. And our dogs and cats are dying from kidney disease and cancer at an exponential rate, because a lot of these byproducts that don't make it into the human grade food get passed on to the dogs and the cats. Right. So they're getting a concentrated, because they're eating twice a day. And so it's bioaccumulating in our pets and it's killing them. It's just crazy.
Yeah. I'm glad I wrote stuff down, because I knew we were going to get off on tangents.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. I feel like, that's why I have a podcast, because I feel like I could talk about this stuff all the time, and I appreciate you reaching out to me, because I don't really get an opportunity to just kind of go off the cuff, right? I don't get interviewed or asked to be interviewed a lot. I do most of the interviewing on my podcast. And so when I get a chance to kind of freestyle, it just, you can hear the assimilation of all of the episodes kind of coming together, and the things that I've learned by doing this podcast, and how they, at some point, there's all of there's this convergence of knowledge that you start to see. You start to put things together, and you're just like piecing it all together. And so I'm really grateful for the opportunity to like verbally, outwardly assimilate that, not in a script, not in an episode, but just kind of, off the cuff. So thanks
for coming on, because it's I think it helps people see the big picture, and with, we would just name so many things going on, and it's very overwhelming, and it's very hard to, well, I got to worry about this. Well, I got to be worried about that. And it's like, well, I kind of want to show people, well, this is how you kind of generally worry about it all, without it like, without, you just want to stay inside and go like this,
Sometimes I can't even go to the grocery store. It's hard to eat, even.
It's hard.
I become a prisoner of what I know. And I know people get overwhelmed with decision fatigue when then they're like, okay, well, what am I supposed to eat? That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that. At some point, we have to make decisions to, okay, well, am I going to eat a little bit of poison or a lot of poison? Poison, but that's just the way it is.
It sounds like, a lot of the decisions we make in America tend to be, what's the lesser evil?
Yeah, it's still evil.
Still evil.
I say, yeah.
Yep. I'm just looking at the questions I wrote down. I think. Oh, so what is next with your podcast? Because I did listen to your last episode, and I don't want you to stop doing the podcast.
Aw, thank you for listening. Yeah, the last episode, the JBS, the pork episode. Yeah. I need to figure out a healthy balance. I love doing my podcast. There's no doubt about it. So for anybody who's listening, who is subscribed to my podcast, the podcast isn't going away. There's still so much to talk about, but I feel like I'm a little bit in kind of a vortex where I have so many things personally happening that require my focus. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, we had this extreme heat event. I'm in Oregon, in Western Oregon, and it was 110, 115 degrees. And when you have livestock or you're growing crops, I know so many farmers that lost hundreds of animals. They lost their whole, 80% of their crops in that 1 or 2 days where it was just unbearably hot. And so I lost animals. I had to reconfigure some things. I recently moved. Like I have an off-farm job that takes my time, requires me to put in a certain amount of hours every week. And, I was getting to this point where I was like, oh, I have to record my podcast. And it was like Thursday. And it became overwhelming. And because it's not my primary source of income, I have to keep things real. I have to keep things realistic. Like I have to reorganize my time. And so I'm so glad to be doing this with you and hearing your feedback that there are people listening. And I realize that there are people listening, and I'm so, so grateful for that. It makes me want to continue doing it every week. I wish I could just sit around and have my bills pay themselves, to be honest, but doesn't everybody?
Time to get a sugar daddy.
So I don't know yet. And that's just me being honest and transparent. I don't know yet, but I know that, with the season finale coming up, that's episode 70. And I've been knocking them out, every week with maybe a week or two break in between seasons. And I'm a little exhausted. I really would like to be able to monetize them a little bit more. But, on the other hand, I would like to just be doing it, just to be doing it. If people want to buy me a cup of coffee, they can buy me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/foodsline. If they want to be a patron, be a patron. You want to make a donation? Make a donation. You want to buy something from my website, my book, or whatever? Great. Awesome. I hate to have it be a requirement, because I think when things rely on income, the focus becomes the generation of income, right, as opposed to the passion of discovery. And so I don't want to go down that road.
I feel like I'm in the exact same boat as you. And I am starting a new job, so it's going to be like, who knows? I tried to get as many recorded before I started, just because I don't even know when the next one, the next opportunity is going to be to record one. Right. But, I'm not making any money, and it's, but I love to do it because I love to learn new things, number one, but also, I was amazed when I was flying as a flight attendant how little people knew about it. And I was always the person on the crew that would have like a list of 5 restaurants I was going to try to go to that night, and really knew a lot about food. But so many people, I remember going to one place and the person was like, "Oh, it's so expensive here. I should have just went to McDonald's." When we're in Paris, France.
Right.
What are you doing?
You can McDonald's at home.
Exactly. So I was like, there's clearly a need for education here. And not just that, but even, I talked to I mentioned I have a twin brother, and even visit, like talking to him about food. We're twins. We're 2 minutes apart. 2 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And
Who's older?
I am. Well, that's all I got on him now because he's taller than
Yeah.
me now. But just the lack of knowledge that I feel like I take for granted a lot because I don't know that other people don't know it. Just how there's a lot of things that if you don't know, you don't know. Like you definitely, everything I look up on like my Instagram and stuff, like that's all food related for the most part. So I come in like these, foodie echo chambers. And I'm like, oh, everybody knows this stuff. And then I get surprised when people don't. So I'm like, oh, this is really important to get out there. And I think, especially with your podcast, a lot of the content I guess it would be like evergreen content, right? So like it's not a lot of it is like, oh, this just happened and you can listen to it. But the story you had about the second man of color to get a patent for that corn invention. I'm blanking on his name, but
Henry Blair.
Henry Blair. I was like, where else am I going to hear that content? And
I mean, it's out there, to be honest, it's out there. Sometimes you have to dig for it a little bit, but, I like history. I like learning about farming and farmers. I like economics, I like learning about, what is the reality that's happening, right? A lot of us, we just go through life because we just got to get through the day. There's just stuff we got to do. Who has time to ask about Henry Blair, or Epicite corn or JBS? Like people don't have the time, the mental space. It will collapse their worldview if they listen to what I have to say or what you have to say. It will just collapse their worldview. And people don't want that. They want to be, there's enough bullshit going on in the world to just make them feel awful about life. And if you have to think about, why the chicken on your plate is going to exacerbate your high blood pressure or your diabetes or whatever, they'd rather just leave it up to the doctor to figure it out and give them the pharmaceuticals to take care of the symptoms, right? Because that's what they do. The medications, they just treat the symptoms. They don't treat the root cause. I mean, I don't know.
Speaking of that, though, I just interviewed a guy that you might like to interview. His name is, he goes by Chef Dr. Mike, and he just started a program at the University of Montana called Culinary Medicine. That's all.
Drop that connect for me.
I will.
Connect. That sounds really interesting.
I'm very excited about that podcast. He was very interesting, and I'm sure that he's
awesome.
I want to take the course, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it is very interesting because, Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine. That's how this all started for a lot of people. People want the benefit of food that has the nutrition in it that we're being told is in it, right? We want that. We want to eat fresh fruits and vegetables that aren't contaminated or genetically modified. We want to eat things that are ripe and not, shipped halfway across the world and then artificially ripened because they don't have the nutrient. That's the other thing with farming that you really get to see in real time and understand is how the ripening of food works and why it's so essential to the nutritional density of the food, right? Like you could eat a tomato that's grown in Mexico, and that could be a good tomato, in the middle of December. Probably not. But then you eat a tomato that's grown maybe by your neighbor in your backyard, and you eat it at its peak of ripeness right when you pull it off the vine. The best tomato you've ever had, because you're tasting the natural sugars, you're tasting the lycopene, you're tasting the beta carotene in the skins, and it's just a different dynamic. It's just
I'm a Jersey girl. I remember, that changed my
yeah.
life.
Totally.
But
the cat's just joined me over here. He's coming over. He's over there.
is there
found
anything
me
that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about?
Oh gosh, I mean, we could go on for hours, couldn't we? The two of us. I did interview another young chef who was also gardening, and we started talking about the restaurant industry and the waste in the restaurant industry, and how restaurants, even though they make it look lovely on the plate, a lot of them are getting them from places like Cisco, and food inputs aren't really coming from small farms. So there's enough to talk about. We could do this again. Yeah. We could do this again.
The farmer. I listened to that one. That one was good.
Precious the foodie. Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting talking to her because we had a lot in common.
So here's another question. So how do you know the RZA? That's the real question.
Yeah. Well,
I got my boyfriend to I was like, she interviewed the RZA? He was like, he was so excited.
Yeah, well, so my career began as a graphic designer out of college. And I was an entrepreneur, a young entrepreneur. I owned my own graphic design agency, and I was designing album covers. And, working in the music industry for a really long time as a graphic designer, I'm gonna drop a name right now that you may or may not know if you haven't looked at my LinkedIn profile, but my graphic design studio is called Stereotype, and I designed the notorious B.I.G. double album Life After Death.
What?
So
my boyfriend,
I had a lot of
so excited.
Yeah, I had a lot of connections in the music industry, and one of my really good friends, like my friend from elementary school, who works for a record label, we were talking, and he was like, "Oh my God, I love your podcast," and he was like, "You need to interview some celebrities and whatnot, and this, that, and the other thing." And he was like, "The Riz is vegan." And I was like, "That's right, the Riz is vegan." He was like, "I'm gonna reach out to him. I'll be right back." And he sent this email. Literally, it happened in 3 days, where the Riz was like, "Yeah, sure." And I was like, "What?" Because I'm from New York, so I grew up with the Wu-Tang Clan. I'm not from Staten Island, but it was crazy. It was crazy.
That's so cool. Yeah. My boyfriend was
like looking over at it. Where is he? Is he not going to show his face?
What? Oh, the cat? Oh,
your boyfriend.
Oh, he's in Tennessee. I'm just looking over because I keep the patio door open for the good lighting, but I see cars and the people walking, and it just catches my eye.
Yeah. I was like, is he there?
He would. Oh my God, I can't. He might actually listen to the podcast. I'm like, I'm not gonna tell him. Like, you gotta listen to this one. There's information about Wu-Tang. And he was. Yeah, he introduced me to all that music. We grew up together. So he, I was always.
That's how I don't know the RZA personally, but I'm connected in those circles by way of my graphic design work. I did most of the Bad Boy albums in the late 90s. and a lot of Sony stuff, a lot of Arista stuff, a lot of other people's stuff, Jermaine Dupri. I did one of Luke's albums, which was, it is what it is, whatever. Yeah, so that was my first career.
So that's why your logo is so cool, too.
I don't know. Thank you. I threw it together, really. I mean, when I do stuff for myself, I don't do it on the level that I would do it for a client. I really am just trying to like knock it out, get it done. With my
You are your
podcast.
most important client.
No, I should. You're right. But I don't take that kind of care with the things that I do, like my book. I did my book in 30 days. I didn't
what is
really.
the title of your book?
It's called Adding Raw is Easy. And it's on my website. It's on foodslane.com. You can check out the PDF version of that. And it's, I took all the pictures. I designed it, but I don't really spend as much time on my stuff as I spend on a client stuff because I'm not paying myself. I'm just doing it.
I wrote my book and I did I taught myself InDesign. I taught myself and I completely understand. That was one of the biggest pains in the ass thing I ever did in my life. Just trying to figure out how to put page numbers on the book took me like 3 weeks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it didn't take me long because I know the software and I can do it pretty quickly for myself. I can build my own website. I can do my own logos and stuff. Yeah. And it's useful. It is a useful skill. I'm glad that's what I built a career in. It's continued to bring many, many wonderful blessings into my life. So, it's a trade skill that I will have forever. And I'm really grateful for it for sure. So, well, I am looking at the clock and I got farm shit to do. Excuse my French. But I really enjoy talking with you. You should totally come on my podcast and let me interview you.
For sure.
And we'll talk about recipes because I think it's really, I know for me, I love baking. I love baking. I love making fresh bread. I love baking cookies. I love doing all of that stuff. And I know that I probably shouldn't eat as many baked goods and baked treats that I like to make. But, when you have like an orchard full of pears and you're just like, oh, what am I going to do with all these pears? Like there's only so much pear butter you can stand.
Yeah.
So you have to make a down pear cake, like who doesn't want that?
Or, poached pears, or pears are so versatile. I love pears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll have to talk recipes,
Yeah.
That would be fun.
That would be fun. I'll hit you up as soon as I'm done with training and I know what my schedule is.
Yeah. Well, again, the Food Slang podcast will continue, and I'll throw this out there. I'm open to suggestions. So if there's any topics that you want to hear about, things that maybe you've thought about and asked questions about, that's the question I want to throw out to you and your audience. What do you want to know? What ingredients should I cover in season 7? Anything come to you off the top of your head?
I was just going to say I loved the food history ones. I loved those. And I loved the first one about kale, which I had always kind of sort of known this. I had like the story, that you hear when you're working in the kitchen is basically kale, this fucking garnish. How is it this, how is it what it is today? Like we used to just fucking put it on the plate to like put tomatoes and the onions on for like someone's burgers, just to dress up the plate. And all of a sudden it became like this superstar. So when you told that story, that's really the one that it hooked me, because usually if I'm looking at someone's podcast, I'll look at the first one they've done first, and then I'll do the most recent one. And because I want to see how they've evolved and, what their style's like and stuff like that. So I feel like that's a good way to do it. But then I listened to that one, I listened to the top one, I listened to like 5 other ones, and I've been listening. I was just in the middle of Yo Soy Peaches, and so I gotta go back to that one.
It's just crazy. I've learned so much doing this podcast, but like I said, I don't think that there's any shortage of ingredients or topics. I've just kind of exhausted a lot of them. I think another one that was really eye-opening for me was the spices one, turmeric. It's just a shame, for chefs and for people, home cooks and people who, use spices. The majority of our spices are imported from all over the world, and it is absolutely diabolical. It's diabolical. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not going to spoil it. No spoiler alert here. You're going to have to go listen to it, because it's just a travesty. And when you think about like our health and our well-being, you want to. People have been eating turmeric in the last decade, right, as a health supplement.
Okay.
The problem with that is that it's contaminated.
Of course it is. Of course it is. That's one of the ones I don't really like too much.
Unless you're eating fresh turmeric, it's contaminated. And that is a problem. And you don't realize it if you go to Starbucks or you go to your favorite coffee shop and you're like, oh, I'll have a turmeric latte. Or I'll have this turmeric salad dressing. You have no idea the source of that turmeric.
Well, even the, oregano, which I found out I'm pronouncing it wrong, but I'm going to continue to pronounce it wrong. Apparently it's oregano, but it just sounds too fancy for me.
Yeah.
But I forgot which country was growing it, but it was like they grew like 15 tons of it a year, but they exported 19 tons a year. So they were like filling it with like strawberry leaves and like different, leaves that
happens to so much of our food. The olive oil episode, the honey fraud. I mean, wine. We haven't even gotten to wine and coffee on my podcast yet either. It's just diabolical. Like I said, there's just so much we could talk about, but I'm open to suggestions. So if you have something that you personally or specifically want me to cover, I will dedicate that episode to you.
Thank you. I'm going to think about it.
Yeah. Hit me up. Hit me up on the email and let me know. Let me know soon, though, because I need to start thinking about episodes in season 7. What we're going to do. But it may transform into 3 episodes a month instead of 4 episodes a month, like every 10 days. I just can't handle the weekly podcast right now.
I mean, they're worth the wait. That's what I say.
Oh, thanks. Awesome.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for listening to Chef Grace's Place. And don't forget to subscribe to Food Slaying. And buy her a coffee. Buy us some coffee. And come on. Yeah. And, check out the Patreon. I also started a Patreon. I'm still working.
Awesome.
And I'm looking into other forms of subscription stuff and all that kind of podcasting stuff. So if I find anything good, I'll be sure to let you know.
Please do. And, you keep up the good work too. Thanks for reaching out. I am subscribing to your YouTube channel so that I can stay informed about everything that you're up to. I wish you all the best. I'm certainly open to doing this again sometime soon. And I'm really grateful. Thanks for taking some time to ask me some questions. I appreciate that. Yeah.
All right.
Cool. Bye, Grace.
Bye.